After 3 months, it's the day many European countries lift border controls. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard from the French border town of Schoeneck for France 24.
And I'm Melinda Crane for DW, standing on a German sidewalk alongside the French main street. We're in the Saar region, where European economic cooperation began 70 years ago last month.
We're going to be asking whether those border controls left a bitter taste as we embark on a new phase. Can the Franco-German motor drive EU recovery?
Our title, Grand Reopening. France 24 and DW join up at the border for the debate. Welcome.
And 388 kilometers away is Ludovic Subran in the French capital, Paris, chief economist at insurers and asset managers Allianz. Thanks for being with us.
And we're joined by Reiner Hoffmann. He is president of Germany's powerful trade union confederation, the DGB. And let me start out with a question to you, Reiner Hoffmann. When Corona hit, you urgently appealed to EU member countries to coordinate their responses to the virus. That didn't happen here at this border. As it reopens, would you say that Germany's unilateral move to reimpose border controls was a mistake?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake because we made the experience that all member states are affected by the corona pandemic, and a more coordinated response from the early beginning would have been much better than every member state went on his own way, and Germany didn't give the best example at the early beginning.
Ludovic Subran, you have roots in this part of France. Your thoughts?
Well, my mother is actually from there, and I work from the largest insurer who happens to be German. So for me, closing the French-German border was a heartbreaker. And I agree that, it was stupid. And it is because trust was very low that every country in the European Union decided to manage the crisis on its own. And now we're asking an act of faith and reopening as if nothing happened. But most of the countries, and especially most of the companies, will remember this as a scar for quite some time.
Quite some time, you say, and that's the big question here locally. We spoke to the recently re-elected mayor of Schoeneck, Gabriel Bastian. It was a Friday night. Suddenly, here we are on the French side. Over the other side of the street, it's the German side. And these barriers come up.
Sans prévenir qui que ce soit, les autorités allemandes nous ont mis des barrières, c'était même des barricades, je dirais, des barricades, ce qui fait que d'une seconde à l'autre, on ne pouvait plus passer en Allemagne, et les Allemands ne pouvaient plus passer en France provisoirement. J'ai été prévenu par les habitants, des coups de fil, des messages, j'étais étonné, personne n'a dit quoi que ce soit, je crois que même l'autorité préfectorale n'était pas au courant. Donc ils ont fermé toutes les frontières d'un coup.
And you have essential care workers who work at the hospital in Saarbrücken.
Pas seulement à l'hôpital, dans les usines, dans les entreprises, dans les restaurants. Et nous avons à peu près sur Schoeneck 600 Allemands qui résident chez nous.
Will this leave scars?
Pour le moment, il faut dire que les Français sont vexés. Ils sont vexés. Il y a eu beaucoup de remarques, on n'ira plus chez eux à ce tarif-là. Bon, il ne faut pas oublier que les frontières ont été fermées par le gouvernement fédéral et pas par le gouvernement de la Saar. J'espère que ça va laisser des séquelles, mais pas trop longtemps, parce qu'il y a quand même une grande amitié entre nos communes. Vous savez, l'Eurodistrict, vous avez Saar-Moselle-Avenir, composé avec les maires des grandes villes de Saar, comme le maire de Saarbrück, les maires des villes de chez nous. Il y a des relations très, très, très amicales. Vous avez même les anciens combattants de Schoeneck qui se retrouvent avec les anciens combattants allemands, vous vous rendez compte?
Gabriel Bastian, does it change for you personally the way you see Europe?
Je suis déçu par l'Europe. Je suis déçu. Je ne pensais pas que ça arriverait à ce point, qu'on nous fermerait comme ça les frontières et que du jour au lendemain, c'était la devise, c'était le Français est porteur du corona, dehors, on n'en veut pas. Alors que la grande injustice, c'est que les voitures allemandes, les Allemands circulaient comme ils voulaient. Ils rentraient, ils sortaient en France comme ils voulaient. Aucun problème. Et le Français, c'était le personnage qu'il fallait éviter.
A lot of the townspeople here have not forgotten that viral video of a 65-year-old Frenchman who was pushed to the ground by German police when he sneaked across the border to buy cigarettes. We also have people who told us of cars being keyed and basically not being welcome across that border.
We are taping this show in front of a local restaurant that found itself in a no man's land when the barricades went up and cut this town in half. German restaurant owner Thomas Schütze says even when he finally reopened after lockdown, the lack of French customers badly hurt his business.
Ja, ich denke mal, das war nicht nur die Gastronomie, die davon betroffen war, sondern wir sind aufeinander angewiesen, sowohl wir auf die Franzosen wie die Franzosen auch auf uns. Also wir Deutsche, wir gehen gern nach Frankreich einkaufen, besondere Lebensmittel. Die Franzosen kommen hier zu uns in den Einzelhandel. Da gibt es so viele Geschäfte, die man namentlich nennen könnte, die zu 75–80% von französischer Kundschaft leben.
What do you expect from the European Union going forward?
Ja, ich erhoffe mir, dass es also solche Grenzschließungen nicht mehr gibt, weil wir sind eins, ja, und wir wollen zusammengehören oder wir gehören zusammen, und dass solche Schließungen Keile in jahrelang gepflegte Freundschaft treibt, das ist sehr schmerzlich. Ja, und es ist sehr schlecht zu verstehen, dass das so schnell geht, was man jahrelang aufgebaut hat, dass man das so schnell zerstören kann. Leider Gottes muss man auch sagen, es sind immer nur einige Böse, die da rausfallen und aus dem Ruder gehen und, was weiß ich, Franzosen beschimpfen, wenn sie in Deutschland auf dem Parkplatz parken und so weiter und so fort. Es sind nur die einigen. Man möchte doch mal klarstellen, dass das Gros der Bürger hier in Schöneck, das Gros in Gerstweiler, die zwei Orte, die direkt aneinander grenzen, zusammenhalten.
Yeah, Melinda, you mentioned how this restaurant is in a no man's land. I'm standing on a piece of sidewalk here that is right in France. If I put my foot here, I'm actually in Germany, and that gives you an idea. Reiner Hoffmann, your thoughts on whether this will leave lasting scars?
Yeah, I think the experiences we made over the last couple of weeks is that Europe was not really in a position to cooperate much stronger together. We made a lot of painful experiences in border regions, and don't forget all the people coming from France, working in Germany, or the other way around, workers from Germany going to France. This has been really a difficult period of time where new tensions have been created, which have been, to my opinion, entirely unnecessary. If a much more coordinated cooperation would have happened over the last couple of weeks.
Ludovic Subran, is this a systemic problem with the European Union, or was this just, well, the panic because we'd never seen a pandemic like this one before?
Of course, there is an element of panic. I think it was a first for many of us. It's once in a generation, and hopefully only once. But I think the resentment also started very strongly when it was about the sanitary scandal that we went through in France. People were extremely disappointed to hear that our German neighbors had tests and masks and we didn't have any. So I think that there is, of course, the original sin, which is how weak the European Commission has been at the beginning, at the onset of this crisis. But very quickly, we saw also the divergence when it came to the number of infected people and the number of casualty, which created this sense of nervousness. And there were mistakes. Remember that there was export of masks from Germany to Italy that was, a bone of contention at one point. And people remember this, and also the way we behaved, I would say, at the onset of the crisis between government was not perfect. So I hope that we will overcome this resentment, and that now we are going to build something strong together. Germany is going to be hold the presidency of the European Union on the 1st of July, and it's a very defining moment for European solidarity and sovereignty, which are the first time we hear those words even in the world of the German Foreign Office.
Let us come back in a few minutes to the question of that German EU Council presidency. But first, a question to both of you briefly about potential political implications from the resentments that you have both described and that we heard about in those interviews with people here in the town. Ludovic Subran, you have worked for the French Finance Ministry. You know French politics very well. Do you see the potential for the economic pain and frustration that were voiced there, sparking perhaps right-wing nationalism in regions like this one?
I mean, historically, this region has been one of the bastion of Marine Le Pen. Huh? We need to remember this, in spite of the very European sentiment you just described. So I think what is sure is that everybody is concerned about this health and economic crisis morphing into a political and a social crisis, especially in France, because of the severity of the recession, the severity of the confinement, and also some of the policy mistakes that are in the making when it comes to not restarting the engine soon enough. So if everybody is kind of worried, and everybody's looking also at what's happening in Germany, because indeed Chancellor Merkel has a record high level of popularity, while President Macron is actually losing steam. So we're also looking a little bit how the other countries are going to vote on the aftermath of this. Yeah.
And Reiner Hoffmann, just briefly, your thoughts on potential political implications of these wounds that you talked about a moment ago?
Yeah, I think the risk is high that, as you have described, in France, Le Pen, or in Germany, AfD could gain political capital out of this crisis. But on the other hand, if things are going better, and if the pandemic is under control, and if economic recovery starts soon, I think we have also a huge number of opportunities. If especially France and Germany going in the same direction, and there are some reasons to be optimistic.
Reiner Hoffmann, we spoke with a man who works in a factory that makes auto brakes parts, and you can imagine he was not pleased to hear that Peugeot was thinking of bringing posted workers, 50 of them from Poland, to work at their factory over in Metz, while there are these partial layoffs. Again, does the European Union need to review its rules?
Yeah, especially when it comes to posted workers, we saw that this is to some extent a reason that workers are exploited, and we need much better safety rules for posted workers, and the directive which has been reformed by the European Union could be a positive basis to do much better.
It's something that Emmanuel Macron talked about on the campaign trail. That was in 2017.
It's still a couple of years ago, and in Germany we are just implementing this European directive into national law. And I hope and convinced that we can positive results in the next years.
I'd like to come back to that question of Franco-German cooperation that Reiner Hoffmann mentioned a moment ago. It was born nearly 70 years ago here in Europe's coal belt, when producers of coal and steel in France and Germany pooled their resources under joint management. As we heard earlier from a local history buff whose blog depicts that time here in this town, the European coal and steel community brought stability to a region that these two countries had fought over for centuries.
Also man muss zuerst bedenken, dass es die Nachkriegszeit war. In dieser Nachkriegszeit war ein Bedürfnis für alles. Und diese Kohlindustrie, also diese ganze Schächte, haben ja diesen ganzen Völkern auch Arbeit angeboten. Und es war auch sehr wichtig, dass diese Industrie uns hilft, wieder wirtschaftlich auf ein Top-Level zu kommen. Dann war diese Kultur, wir waren ja beide durch deutsche und französische Kultur geprägt. Und das ist auch ja sehr wichtig, wenn man die beiden Sprachen spricht. Man hat manchmal auch die beiden Interesse gehabt. Und der Beweis ist ja, dass wir schon jetzt jahrzehntelang in Frieden leben und dass es keinen Krieg mehr gibt. Das ist ja schließlich die schönste Eroberung dieser europäischen Gemeinschaft.
Let me ask Ludovic Subran, can the rusty German-French motor be retooled? Merkel and Macron appear to have gotten it up and running again, but is that a temporary recovery, or do you think that their plan for bringing growth back to Europe after COVID can actually drive robust resilience here in this region?
Well, certainly this was what we've been expecting for the last 3 years, right? Every one of them was giving a speech and the other was sounding a bit busy and not answering back. So this time they actually agreed to something quite groundbreaking. this so-called Hamiltonian moment on the 750 billion euro for the European Commission to be able to finance the recovery is groundbreaking. The Next Generation EU is groundbreaking. But more importantly, I think we are coming out of this crisis much less naive when it comes to the US-China rivalry and our place as Europe, as a sovereign Europe, as a strong Europe in this global geopolitical nightmare. So I think the French and the German are quite serious about it. And I think it will actually be the beginning of something. Then how long it will take, how successful will we be, it will depend on all of us to work together. Companies have always been much more European than governments. So we should trust the private sector to do that and not try to be, which the French love to do, a bit too interventionist, because that was really what could be, for me, the big, I would say, disincentive for this recovery to be joint and to be shared and to be successful.
Let me just remind our audience that the Hamiltonian moment essentially refers to a comparison with the history of the United States, when in the 18th century, Alexander Hamilton actually persuaded the original US states to mutualize their debt. In other words, to take responsibility for each other's steps. And that is an element of the Merkel-Macron plan for European recovery. It's an element that President Macron mentioned yesterday evening in his speech to the French nation when he expressed confidence in the plan that he and the German Chancellor have introduced.
Ce plan de reconstruction se fera avec l'Europe, qui, après des débuts timides, s'est hissée à la hauteur du moment. L'accord franco-allemand autour d'un endettement conjoint et d'un plan d'investissement pour redresser l'économie du continent est un tournant historique. En empruntant pour la première fois ensemble, avec la chancelière d'Allemagne, nous proposons aux autres États européens de dire « nous » plutôt qu'une addition de « je ».
Together with your French union colleagues, Reiner Hoffmann, you have applauded the Merkel-Macron plan, but that optimism that we just heard there from President Macron doesn't exactly capture the mood of people here in this region. What can you and your French colleagues in the French Trade Union Confederation, what can you do to ensure that recovery really reaches people in regions like this one?
I think it will be quite important that what Macron and Merkel has agreed will be accepted also by all other member states, which is a long way to go. And it has been mentioned that Germany will take over from the 1st of July the EU presidency. And I see that the German government has a huge responsibility to get a recovery program on the road, which is ambitious and which is really targeted, that recovery can take place soon. And I'm quite convinced that if France and Germany taking their responsibility, that we have an opportunity to use this crisis as a chance for a much closer and a much more social Europe. And as you have mentioned, we have to see this in a broader context. What is going on in the United States? What is going on in Asia, in China? And what kind of role Europe will be able to play in the future? And if we don't use this opportunity, I think then we are facing a big failure, and nobody has an interest that Europe will fail.
In that speech Sunday night, Ludovic Subran, we heard the French president use words like sovereignty, independence. Of course, it means different things for different people. As you said earlier, this village where I'm standing, Schöneck, voted for Marine Le Pen in the second round of the presidential election. Ahead of Emmanuel Macron, voted for the far right. Economic sovereignty, that means different things for different people in this Europe we live in.
You know, as a French working in Germany, the French were always seen as very interventionist. We wanted European champions, and when faced with Trump and Xi Jinping, and then the Germans, especially the business community, was always saying, no. Our strength is our laissez-faire. We are a French word, by the way, beacon of hope of capitalism. We shouldn't intervene too much. And now Germany becoming French in a way, because the Staatssekretär Miguel Berger speaks himself about sovereignty. So I think we will take yet another few months to define what we really mean by sovereignty. Germany, during the presidency of the European Union, will also talk about European public goods. President Macron used to talk about a Buy European Act. All of that are very strong words, but as you say, how do they translate on the ground? How do they translate in cities like Schöneck, where people every day live the French-German friendship? And I think this for me will be the proof in the pudding of the next few years. And for Chancellor Merkel, because the elections are coming in Germany, and Macron has a bit more time, but they will have to leave it in the real life of these people to make sure that it's not just pure words and the French intellectual concept that has been thrown at a crisis that has been very severe and with life-changing moments for people like those of Schöneck. Yeah.
Reiner Hoffmann, what should we be buying European, or what should we be making in Europe that we're not making right now?
I think we are faced with, independently from the corona pandemic, we are facing big challenges driven by digitalization and climate change. And the European Trade Union Confederation, together with the French unions, with the DGB, we are asking for an ambitious investment program. And this has to be tailored in a way that really people can make positive experiences at the ground in all municipalities. If we see climate change as a common challenge, no member states will be able to tackle it alone. And this is something I think we have to be pretty clear what citizens expecting, and that the transition.
But Reiner Hoffmann, what do they want? Reiner Hoffmann, what do they want the EU, France, and Germany to invest in specifically?
Yeah, for example, in transport systems, we need new concepts of mobility. So what does it mean if we have fast trains coming from Madrid via Barcelona, Paris, Cologne, Berlin to Warsaw? This is nothing very, very which would not be possible. We are talking much too long about such strategies, and this has to be made more precise.
Let me go to you, Ludovic Subran, to ask about a couple of those possible cultural differences when it comes to intentions for the recovery plan. François just mentioned sovereignty can mean different things to different countries. Would you expect to see Europe, it may be reopening its borders, as we can see, by the way, from all the traffic passing on this street that was very quiet for a long time. Europe may be reopening its own borders, but are we seeing Europe potentially more closed in future when it comes to global trade?
The coronavirus has been one of the most severe shock on trade. We're going to lose close to $3 trillion of exchange of goods and services in 2020. That's a first. And of course, everybody in the recovery is trying to have this reshoring narrative whereby people are going to try to save jobs and protect jobs. And maybe, compact supply chains a bit more. And this is where I think, the German and the French perspective will be very different. The French have always been much less dependent on global trade than Germany, which has been mercantilist by nature. So Germany, in the Konjunkturpaket, the stimulus program, is trying to help local consumption. Germany, by investing in the French-German Accord for the recovery, is trying to have outlets in Europe that are stronger, in Italy, in Spain, in France. But Germany's model is very dependent on demand from Asia, on demand from the US. And so I don't know to which extent we're going to be in sync when it comes to how protectionist we want to be, or how retaliatory we want to be towards China or towards the US or towards the ASEAN country. The Southeast Asian countries are clearly doing dumping, fiscal and social, to be part of the global chain after COVID. And so how will we address this when we have very different stakes? We don't have the same providers, we don't have the same clients. how can we have the same voice? That's going to be really something up for discussion in the next months.
Let me ask Reiner Hoffmann for his reaction to that. A lot of the jobs of the industries that you represent in the German Trade Unions Confederation depend on exports. Is this something that concerns you, a possible movement toward a more closed or more state interventionist Europe? Some people say that the government's hand is going to become much, much heavier in the wake of Corona.
I think you are right that especially Germany is depending very much from a strong export industry. 60% of our exports are going into the European Union. We shouldn't forget this. And our first target and first goal should be, and this is what the French trade unions and the DGB has made clear a couple of weeks ago, that we are depending so much from Europe, and that European recovery is important for Germany, but it is important for France and Italy and Spain. If people are not in good circumstances, if they are suffering in Italy, then German workers will suffer a couple of months later. So we have to act much more together. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, if it comes to the ongoing globalization process, here the Corona pandemic, I think, learned our lesson that we should use Europe as a tool for a new agenda setter, for agenda setting, that will be much more fair, it will be much more sustainable as it was in the past. And again, this cannot be done by a single member state, cannot be done by France or Germany alone. We can act only as strong partners together at the European level, together with the European Union.
If we've seen a spike, Reiner Hoffmann, in the rise of populism this past decade, it's because we already had a continent-wide emergency in 2007, 2008, and there's a feeling among citizens that the banks got bailed out, but not the people. This time around, what will be different? Will it just be multinational corporations that will get bailed out, or will it also be workers that will be helped?
No, I think, first of all, workers have to experience that they got the support which is needed. And secondly, we have to make sure that companies are taking up their responsibility. And that means for the next couple of weeks that dismissals should be limited, that we should avoid an increase in unemployment. If unemployment figures are on the increase, I think Europe will be in a very difficult situation, and this could be a new source for right-wing parties, anti-European movements, if we don't deliver what workers are expecting. They're expecting security and safe jobs.
Let me ask both of you this. As you have said, and as President Macron emphasized last night, German-French cooperation is reviving. It's looking stronger than it has in quite some time. On the other hand, Germany is vastly outspending all other EU member countries when it comes to national recovery rescue packages. Couldn't that unfairly tilt the playing field going forward? In other words, represent a real advantage for this already disproportionately strong German economy compared to other countries? Reiner Hoffmann, I'll start with you and then get a reaction.
Certainly, this is a very serious point, and the risk is very high. Here, I think it's absolutely necessary that also the German government has to take up their responsibility, as they have agreed in the coalition agreement on the future of Europe, that Germany has to spend more towards the European Union, that Germany has the responsibility that we get our own fiscal capacity, that the multi-annual financial framework will be handled under the German presidency. This has to become a success. If this will be a failure, I think Europe will be at risk, and this is not good for German citizens, as not good for French citizens.
Ludovic Subran, your reaction to that, perhaps as a Frenchman working in Germany, do you think Germany is ready to really take European solidarity seriously in the sense of putting its money on it?
Yeah, I think so. But as an economist, I'm always looking at, what's happening underneath. And the issue is, of course, that you still have voices against the European Central Bank and the low or negative interest rates because Germany's savers feel that they're being taxed. The issue is that the business community fears for future corporate tax increases. And so, of course, everything that is spent now is seen as a debt to the future. This is still very much what the German business community is looking at. But I believe that Germany is coming out very strong from this crisis in the way it is committing itself to its own, to its neighbors, to its outlets. Germany is taking a form of leadership that is economic, but that is also in terms of policies. In France, we adopted Kurzarbeit, the furlough, from Germany because we know it worked in 2008, 2009 to safeguard jobs. How much more cooperative can we be than this, right? But the future is, of course, about making sure that you mentioned this fear that is very present in France, that France is lagging behind, that the French manufacturing sector will never be stronger, than its neighbors, and that we see Germany putting a lot of money, and in France, because of the past money spent, we cannot do as much. So that's going to be, of course, something that leaders, federations like Herr Hoffmann's federation, and the unions will have to discuss and to reassure one another to show how it is important, how important it is that supply chains work together. Instead of trying to see this cannibalistic Europe. We need to go from rules to trust. We need to go from safety net to springboard. We need to go from, a real cooperation. That means that, maybe reshoring will mean that we will have more workers in one country than another. But in the end, it will mean more workers in both countries. And this is something that we really need to start explaining now to avoid that 2 years down the road, we have another Greek moment. For me, that's the biggest fear I have. And I want to avoid that at all costs by explaining really what we're doing right now and what should happen.
But Ludovic Subran, you mentioned earlier how the private sector is often more European than the politicians. Nonetheless, there is that fear that those corporations are going to, yes, take advantage of this crisis, to fire a lot of people, increase their productivity, as was the case again in 2008, 2009.
Well, this is the real second wave, right? Jobs and bankruptcies are on the mind of politicians. And that's why, for example, the German government decided to do the stimulus package now to avoid, a massive, a period of unemployment and bankruptcies. In France, we've postponed the decision to September. But we have these very strong, short-term placement programs, and we're working on trying to make sure that bankruptcies don't happen, or at least big bankruptcies don't happen. But this is going to be, of course, a very domestic issue to manage. If some governments don't show that they measure up to the social needs of their countries, then the entire European sentiment will come back. But the one difference is that we have on both sides of the Rhine leaders that actually don't blame it all on Europe. We will not make the mistake of 2012 again. We've been vaccinated against this mistake. We cannot blame it all on Europe. We need to explain the positive on Europe, and this is all what it takes to make sure that even though we may have social difficulties in each country, it doesn't jeopardize the broader need for a stronger Europe, a more industrially independent Europe, a more autonomous and sovereign Europe.
And just a politics question, a domestic one, Ludovic Subran. You mentioned how Angela Merkel rolled out that huge stimulus package. It seems to be coming piecemeal here in France. Why didn't we have a big bazooka moment from Emmanuel Macron when it comes to, talking about the auto sector, aerospace, tourism? Why didn't he do it all in one blow?
We don't have the same countries, right? So the French policymakers right now are convinced that demand is not the problem, that we should all do supply and productive investment, and we need to boost potential growth because we were so profligate before. there is a part of truth in here, but it's true that in a sense it means that they're picking the sectors that is very French to be interventionist. On the contrary, in Germany, because of the room to maneuver and because of the need for quite some time to give these incentives to consumption and investment, because there was an investment gap, then you had this big bazooka with the temporary VAT reduction and so forth. So I think it's the history of two countries. And you cannot expect that magically we will be in sync on everything when the crisis hit. But of course, we're going to have to converge in some ways if we want this recovery to be as shared as we are expecting it to be.
Last question to both of you with the request for a very short answer, if you would, because we are just about out of time. Reiner Hoffmann mentioned earlier in the program turning a crisis into an opportunity, essentially a quote from Churchill saying, never waste a good crisis. The fact is, the EU has had quite a few crises in the past 8 years, and it hasn't always made good use of them. What do you think? How optimistic are you that things will be different this time? Reiner Hoffmann?
I'm quite optimistic, and we will make a huge pressure towards the German government to take up their responsibility in the second half of this year.
And Ludovic Subran?
Well, I will do like Mr. Hoffmann on my side of the Rhine, just to make sure that we keep them accountable for what they're promising the people, because we cannot miss that one.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much to both of you.
It's a glass half full kind of day, Melinda.
Yeah. If you are optimistic, you never say the glass is half empty. It's always half full, huh?
Let's make it that way. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us here on The Debate as DW joins up with France 24.
All right, many thanks, Melinda Crane. Many thanks to you for joining us as well. Bye for now.